Hello!
Welcome back to Historia.
I'm Kylie.
I'm Jamie.
We are ready to hit you with the two-parter.
Yes, we
This
are.
is obviously part one. Probably read the title.
Please listen to part one first.
Yeah, because, we always have our part twos. Somehow more people listen to those than the part
They
one.
just want to know the end, I guess.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm that same way when reading books. I like to know what happens at the end, and then I'm like, how do we get here?
That's fair. I mean, at least then is it worth the read? Is there a good ending?
Oh my God. There's some books where I'm like, I fucking read like 400 pages and it ended with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, so stupid.
I get that. That makes sense to me. Alrighty. Well, I don't know what we're talking about today.
It's completely off the wall.
I love that.
Dude, this one, it took me forever because there was just so much, and just trying to gather everything as much as I could. I was like, my head hurts. But so this time around, I'm going to be adding on to a series that you covered.
Okay.
So I am adding to the Outlaw series.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
It's been a minute.
Mm-hmm. So specifically to the Outlaw series, I'm going to be covering the infamous American outlaw, Jesse James.
No. Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. Oh, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm. If you are not familiar with Jesse James, he had made his mark in history with robbery, murder, and a legend that would go down in Wild West history.
Oh my God. Wild Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
I love these types of stories. They're so fun.
Oh, Jesse James. He is a character. Let me tell you that. So before we get started, let me go over where I pulled my information from. With how famous he is, there is a lot to him. There are so many books. There are so many documentaries that you can read. And there's so much to his story that people are finding out left and right. There's so many just like conspiracies about him. Like, he is such a huge legend in American history. There's just so much to him. So I'm not going to be able to cover everything, like every single rumor about him, every single conspiracy. Like, it's just not feasible unless I made this like a 10-part series.
That'd be a lot.
Yeah, like I would have to nitpick everything, and I'm not going to do that because that's not what we're here to do. We're here to get you an idea that we encourage you to do more research yourself if you're interested about it.
Yeah, for sure.
So I found information, like a lot of information on the Legends of America website and the Historic Missourians. Missourians? I say Missourians.
Yeah.
Website. And there's so much there.
They always in Missouri.
Like, yeah. They care about their outlaws and their historical people, because you got to make them known for something other than the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah. Of course.
St. Louis, I guess. Whatevs. So, outlaw, thief, murderer, Robin Hood.
Ooh.
Quote unquote. These were all the names that Jesse James would fall under during his life. If you are not familiar with the Wild West, let me give you a brief synopsis. Because I'm sure the people who are international, I don't know how much you learn about the Wild West in America, in the United States. It is unhinged. It is crazy. There's so much to it.
Yeah.
It's wild. So from the time of the westward expansion, so pretty much people leaving the East Coast in the South and heading west towards like California, Oregon, Washington, like all those states, there was a growth of criminal activity that was increasing in the United States. Many of this activity occurred out west, but this was all over the United States. And this was mainly because law enforcement was still like getting its foot in the door, because I mean, it's like the early mid 1800s. The United States had just become its own country. It's still in the new stage. It's still forming. So law enforcement is still kind of being established. it's not really a thing. Like, it's a thing. Like, you had a sheriff, and they kind of made their own rules at that point. But it was so easy to get away with murder.
They're just trying to figure it out.
if you played your cards right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this occurred all over the United States. It didn't matter where you were. It's just most of the people that you really know of, this happened in the West and the Midwest. So with the expansion of criminal activities, there were some names that would make themselves so famous that they would go down in history. There was Billy the Kid. I thought about covering him.
That's a good one.
Because I was like, he has a freaking wild story, and he was young. But I was like, who is one of the most famous? And Jesse James came up. And I was like, okay, I can believe that. I was like, you hear people naming their kids Jesse James. You hear,
oh yeah,
I don't know why.
There's a whole fandom to him.
There's a whole fandom. Like, there's so many people that follow his legend so closely. It's crazy.
Yeah.
You have John Wesley Hardin. You have Butch Cassidy. He's a big one. Annie Oakley is also a very large. She's a woman outlaw. She was very handy with guns.
I've heard her name.
And that's just like a handful of them. There were so many, and I'm going to mention a lot too, because Jesse James was very close to a lot of them, and they are just as much outlaws as he is, and they have crazy stories too, but I'm just intermingling all these guys into one because it's crazy. So we start in Clay County, Missouri on September 5th, 1847. Jesse Woodson James was born to parents Robert James and Zerelda Cole James.
Oh, that's a cool name. Zerelda.
You don't hear that anymore. You hear Zelda, but Zerelda.
Yeah, that's fancy.
Ooh. So along with his parents, Jesse also had his older brother Frank, younger brother Robert, who would go on to die during infancy.
Oh.
So he didn't live very long. And then he had his younger sister Susan.
Okay.
I don't hear, in all of the information that I looked, there was nothing about Susan.
Oh.
It was all about Frank and Jesse.
Maybe she was just really, like, secretive.
I have no idea. I could not find, I didn't see anything about her, so I don't know. She kind of just went on her own.
Yeah.
Knowing how crazy their family was.
Like, I am not going to be associated with him ever.
Yeah, I had no idea, because, in all of my research, I did not find anything on Susan.
Okay.
Interesting.
Huh.
So Robert and Zerelda would go on to raise their children in Kearney, Missouri on their family farm. So this farm was roughly 100 acres. So originally they were kind of just moving around, kind of here to there, but finally they found this property and they're like, this is where we want to build our home. And so while Zerelda was actually building their home, Robert would go on to be a pastor at a small Baptist church right outside of town.
Okay.
I was like, interesting.
Huh.
So the two were actually very well respected in the community. Like, people loved them. They loved their energy, their atmosphere. They're like, you are good people. He's doing well. She's doing well. Like, she's carrying the team.
Oh, cool.
She was a very strong, independent woman. Like, I got to give her that. So all the children would be born on the family farm. And the first few years of their life, or mostly Frank's, was normal. So Jesse was raised very religious, Christian, kind of like I didn't see anything. I'm guessing, Baptist.
Okay.
So he carried this like religious kind of aspect part of him into his adulthood, because it really brought him closer to his like father.
Okay.
So unfortunately, Jesse did not know his father for very long, because in 1850, Robert would be asked to be a chaplain for a group of men going to California. This was a very common thing because these men were very religious. They wanted to have a pastor with them to hold sermons and stuff, like when they're on their travels. Because sometimes, especially if you're going from the Midwest or even East Coast all the way to California, that's going to take you a shit ton of time. This is going to take you months, depending on when you go to. Because you got to cross the mountains.
That's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. And
got to choose the right time of year.
Yeah, not everyone was going to make it.
Yeah.
So it is also noted during this time, like, why he was going to California was that the United States like gold rush was like super big in California. Like everybody wanted to go there.
Yeah.
You either went to Arizona, California, even Colorado was really big too. But most people wanted to go to California because that's where like they found so much.
Yep.
They just wanted that gold. So Robert would leave in April of 1850, leaving Zerelda in charge of the family farm. So she pretty much was doing her own thing, just making sure that farm was getting worked on and producing stuff. I don't know what they produced. No, I think I read that they produce hemp.
Oh.
And like some other stuff, but I was like, they made
All right.
money off it at least.
Girl.
So, and she took care of that farm and her children.
I love that. That's pretty iconic.
I mean, you have to be when you have three children.
Yeah.
So sadly, Robert would not live to make it home. So historians have assumed it was due to like dysentery or cholera in California, drinking that dirty water.
There it is again.
Yep. Nasty stuff.
Ugh.
Gotta keep your eye out on that dirty water.
Yeah.
So with the death of her husband, Zerelda had inherited the property. So she now had control of it and was left widowed. Jesse was only roughly 2 at the time.
Okay.
Whereas his eldest brother was 7. So Frank was 7. But it's crazy too, because I'm assuming that Zerelda really made sure that like they knew of their father, because he really held that religious aspect in his life, and he also wanted to find out where his dad was buried too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think he ever did try and find his father, because he was buried in an unmarked grave, I'm guessing in California.
Yeah.
But I think at one point Jesse wanted to go look for him, but I mean, how would you find that out?
Yeah.
It's really tough back then.
That's a lot.
They didn't have a telephone and DNA.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to do much of anything at that point.
Yeah, it's pretty much just like, oh, well,
Move on, I guess.
Live in my memory.
Yeah.
So I honestly think that Zerelda could have continued to be a widow, because she is a very strong, independent woman.
For sure.
And she could have easily kept the farm successful. But during this time period, it's the 1850s, it was very common for a woman to still remarry after she's been widowed.
Yeah.
Because it is, unless you're like 60 years old, it's very expected for you to marry again.
Well, she probably doesn't have any money on her own.
I mean, I'm sure that farm was doing quite well.
True.
So
She probably got money from him too when he died.
Yeah, I don't even know if they had life policies back then.
Yeah, I don't know how it worked.
I have no idea. I mean, he was a pastor, so I'm like, probably wasn't making that much. So Zerelda would do pretty much just that, of like the expectations of remarrying, and she would go on to marry Benjamin Sims. Ben was a farmer who was neighbor to Zerelda, so he was like adjacent to them, and offered to be the male figure that the boys needed. He was like, "Hey, I can be your husband. Like, we know each other. You won't be lonely anymore. I can raise these boys right." And she's like, "Okay."
So they just like made a deal.
I'm sure, yeah. She seems like she was not that connected.
Yeah.
So she was like, "Okay," but unfortunately, this was not the case of his promises, or pretty much their deal, I guess.
Oh, no.
In the brief marriage that Zerelda and Ben would have, Ben would show his true colors by showing the lack of affection towards Frank and Jesse. He was just like very detached.
That was the whole business deal.
Yeah, just like yelling at the boys pretty much. And Zerelda was like, She did not appreciate it. She was like, "Fuck this man."
Yes, put your foot down, woman.
Yeah, after many arguments that the two would have, Zerelda had finally had enough of Benjamin, so she started filing for divorce.
Okay.
Which was not common to do in this time.
Yeah, no.
Like, you just stuck it out, but she's like, I'm not having this man near my children anymore. Like,
it's
no,
just
I'm
now
done.
starting to be more like accepted in society, and it's 2024. Like,
I mean, she already has
I can't
3
imagine it back
kids. She's
then.
like, I don't freaking care what people think of me.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm already a widow.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, for real.
So she, crazy enough, this divorce ended up not being necessary, as Ben would be killed during a horse accident in 1854.
What?
Yeah.
Well, that worked out for her
shit.
favor.
Yeah, so it's just like she put all of these plans in motion and then he ended up dying. So I was like, damn, what a crazy way to go.
For real, that's wild.
Oh, man. It was then within the year, Zerelda would go on to meet another man by the name of Archie Reuben Samuel. So Archie was a doctor, but unlike Benjamin, Archie was a man who pretty much let Zerelda take the reins on the family life. He was I feel like he was a very like subdued guy, just chill. Didn't really have that many expectations.
Yeah.
Kind of was focused on his practice. Was just like, hey, I can really be that male figure. Like, I feel like with their marriage, it was more transactional. But
Oh, yeah.
I think but over the years, she grew super attached to Archie. So when he eventually passed, she was very devastated by it. So I think at first it was probably a marriage of convenience, but over the time when you spend so many years together and you build your family, because he raised these boys,
Yeah.
that I think she really got attached to him over the
Okay.
years. So I
That
was
makes
like,
sense.
it was like a friendship to love. I'm assuming.
It just took a few years to
Yeah.
love him.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it mostly was back then. I'm sure it was the same with Robert.
True.
So Archie would go on to raise the James children along with Zerelda. So he would go on to teach Jesse and Frank how to ride a horse and even shooting skills. This is very important in the long run. So Frank and Jesse would also work on the farm.
Okay.
So he pretty much was like, you got to work too. Like, this is how we are. We're a working family. But needing further help on the farm since they purchased the adjoining property. So now they had bigger property.
Yeah.
Archie and Zerelda would go on to purchase 6 slaves to work on the farm. Because that was a very common
feeling
thing
that was
that you
coming.
did. Yep. I guess it kind of ran in the family.
That's got to be a big farm for 6 of them.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think it was like, I think there was a couple women and then some kids.
Jeez.
Yeah, because they would grow. But I read that after the Civil War, when they were freed, like when they were legally freed, I
Yeah.
believe they stayed on the farm.
Oh, wow.
Because that's like, I guess they treated them well and they just wanted to be there. But I'm like, dude, still, it's just, I mean, that they had to go to that point. And I was like, how did they even have that much money to purchase 6 slaves?
Yeah, those have to be kind of expensive, I assume.
Yeah.
For the good ones.
Slaves are not, well, it got very exclusive because no longer, well, legally, it was not legal to import slaves from Africa. So pretty much it was more now of just like you could purchase slaves that were within the country.
Okay.
Like doing the whole importing thing was illegal now.
Okay.
Even though like we learned from the pirate that I covered, Jean
Oh,
Jean-Luc?
Lafitte?
Lafitte, yeah.
Yeah.
Jean Lafitte, that he was legally bringing them in.
Okay.
But it was still legal to purchase slaves in the country. So, and I heard that got kind of expensive, and that's why you would have women, and then so they can produce
Yeah.
more slaves. But I think they mostly had kids, but
America.
yeah. So that's how this was like Midwest, kind of South. It's not really the South. I don't even know where Missouri's located. Is it technically
Midwest.
the Midwest?
I would assume. Yeah, I think it's Midwest.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is what it is. Like, that's
Yeah.
the history of
That's
it.
what was going on at the time.
Yeah. So over time, as the boys got older, it was decided by Frank that he wanted to go to school to be a teacher. Which I was like, really? Well, Jesse was still young enough to have interests in literature and religion. Like, he was obsessed with his dad's old books that he had in his library. Like, he would read them all. He was very
right.
interested into that. So he knew how to read.
That's good.
Yeah. So just as Frank was going to school to become a school teacher, the unfortunate would happen. The Civil War.
Oh, yes. Of course.
Bang,
that thing.
bang, boop, boop. during the Civil War, the state of Missouri was actually a split state. So to better explain, if you did not learn about the Civil War in history, American history, United States history, to be more specific, this war is where the country literally split into two sectors and fought each other to the death, pretty much.
Yep.
They did that from like 1861 to 1865. It was a bloodbath. Many people died. And I feel like they didn't really get anything out of it.
Yeah, not really.
You did get the abolishment of slavery, which is, we do have Juneteenth here now in the United States, where it's a holiday to represent the slaves that were legally freed on this date, June 19th. So, gotta give them that.
Gettysburg.
Gettysburg.
Gettysburg
And then the shooting of Abraham Lincoln. Woo!
Yeah, see, that was during that time.
Yeah, so the
Good
basics.
Abe was the president.
So the North was the Union and the South was the Confederacy. So North and Union, I call it West Side Story. Just snapping.
Oh my God.
So each had their ideals of how the country would be run or should be run. And the North and South did not agree on how it should be run. They were very opposing to it. And it's just, even though that like people in the North also had slaves, this war wasn't even about slavery. It just was like a middleman to it. It was pretty much of like how they wanted to run the country through taxation and how they wanted to do pretty much with like the farming industry and just like
technology
and that's where like slavery came into that process. It's a crazy war. There's so much to it. Like I can't cover the war itself because there's just so much. So I'm just adding little bits and pieces, and Jesse James' history is a part of it.
I think it makes more sense to like kind of do a little bit at a time of the Civil War instead of the entire war.
That
would take a long time.
That's a podcast in itself. Because there's so much to it. It's crazy. So you had the North and the South, but you also had like the middlemans. They were like the split states. They were just like, they weren't really devoted to one or the other. But they were technically in a neutrality like state. But these middle states, this neutrality states, I have to say they probably have the worst consequences, and they are the most like destructive in this because they tried to keep their neutrality, but the Union and Confederacy use that to like their advantages of trying to like bully them. And pretty much use them as like a battleground, which is really sad. So many of these families in these like middle states, in these neutrality states, they would be torn apart as some would fight for the Union and others would fight the Confederacy. It was literally brother against brother. It's crazy. Like there's so many stories too about like how one brother decided to join the Union and the other one decided to join the Confederacy, and they met on the battlefield and they had to murder each other. It legit happened. It's crazy. I would love to cover one of those stories because it's just like, it's so crazy that it actually happened. I mean, it can happen at any point. I mean, there's been so many civil wars in history. And this one is just, I feel like it's kind of getting off people's radar of just like, this is what happens when you have two such split ideologies in one country and you go head to head. It's going to leave severe bloodshed, and family members are going to get involved and they're going to go against each other.
And these were the states that were like trying to stay away.
Like,
that's why they're neutral. They don't want to like really be involved.
Exactly.
And then they get involved.
They have to.
Yeah,
there's no freaking way. It's so sad. It was also expected if you were of age, so I believe like 17, 18, and you were healthy enough, that joining the war was what you did. It was the same in World War I, same in World War II. Granted, in the Vietnam War, you were forced to because that was drafting. But
I think in this war, they were younger.
Yeah, they were definitely about
early teens.
Yeah, early 16.
They didn't really care if you graduated or
had
education.
Yeah, Frank was just 18 years old. But yeah, around like 16 to 18 was like the good spot because you were young enough, you were agile, you were most likely the healthiest out
Gone
of
through
them.
puberty, so you don't have to worry about all that.
Yeah, and then, but sometimes you had some really old men joining too because they were like, I gotta fight the cause.
It was like all the way to like 35 or something. I don't remember.
Oh, some were older, depending
Yeah.
on. Yeah, it was all over the
People
place.
didn't age like they do today.
No,
Just keep that in
they're
mind.
30, looking like they're 80.
Yeah.
So Frank would go on to leave school, and just at the age of 18, he would join the Missouri State Guard siding for the Confederacy, which is expected. This makes sense as they were a family who had owned slaves.
Yeah.
They were very just like, we gotta support like this side. Like that's just how it is. So he would join in May of 1861. While Frank was off to war in the James household, Archie would go on to have a child with one of the slave women.
Okay.
So this child would go on to start living and be raised in the household. I believe he was also named Archie.
Gotcha.
So yeah, he was living in the family with them because Zerelda and Archie didn't have any kids of their own. I don't believe. I didn't see it because she only had 4 kids.
Whose kid was that?
Archie's and
Okay.
one of the slave women's.
Oh, cool. Casual.
Yeah. But I mean, at least he was in the house, but it's like he was probably doing like maid work or something, butler work. I don't know. They never specified it. They didn't get too much detail about it.
Maybe like she couldn't have any more kids or something.
I mean, she was getting up there in age. I mean, Frank's already 18.
So they're probably like, just use a slave
I mean, well, he was probably just having an affair with her
or that.
because that was a very common thing to do.
Yeah.
A lot of men of the household did have illegitimate
Little
children. Yeah.
Little side person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say ho.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I really don't know what to say about that. It's like,
Well, and like you don't have any say if you're a slave, so
yeah.
who knows if they consented to any of it.
I mean, yeah, I don't see any documentation on it, so I have no idea.
Yeah.
So
Anyway, that's that.
Frank would continue to fight in the war and being a part of the Battle of Wilson's Creek. This was a battle where the Confederacy would win and cause them to take control of a part of Missouri. So this was a huge win for them. It would not be long after that Frank would come home briefly due to an injury. It was on his return home that a group of Union soldiers like came into the house and like pretty much beat him up and like forced him to side with the Union.
Oh my God.
But that didn't last long. He was like, after they left, he was like, fuck those guys. I've had enough. And he decided that just joining the Confederacy was not enough. He was like, there's so much politics around it and so much just like you had to follow these certain rules and stuff like that. And he's like, I'm tired of that. I don't want to do that. He's like, I just want these Union guys fucking suck. They're ruining my life. They beat me up. So he was like, I have to find something else to do.
Yeah.
So Frank decided that there was more that he had to get back at the Union. He was like, I want my revenge. Mm-hmm. So this is when he found the Quantrill Raiders. So the Quantrill Raiders were a group of pro-slavery men that took to guerrilla warfare to cause harm to the Union soldiers in their villages. Very radical group. Guerrilla warfare during this time was just fucking wild.
Oh, yeah.
They just burned everything to the ground. It was crazy. These are the dangerous people because they were unhinged.
Yeah.
Unhinged. So the leader of this group was William Clark Quantrill. He was also at the Battle of Wilson Creek with Frank. So that's kind of how they met and kind of had like this rapport going of just like, hey, Quantrill's like, I'm fucking tired of the Confederacy. Like, why are we not doing more to like get back at these Union guys? And Frank was like, bruh, I was thinking the same thing. So eventually Quantrill had enough and was like, I'm going to start my own group and we're just going to take the towns.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Frank heard of it and was like, bruh, can I join? Quantrill was like, hell yeah, brother.
A gang?
Yeah. Well,
Sort of.
they called themselves raiders, which they definitely were because they pillaged and
That's fair.
killed.
They raided.
They raided, that's for sure. So starting with about 12 men, Quantrill started to attack Union camps, patrols, and their settlements. So everything the Union was doing in this Missouri area. So quickly, the raiders would grow to around 100 men in a year. It grew very fast.
Dang.
Frank would hear of this group and decided he wanted to be a part of it. And Quantrill was like, hell yeah, man. So this is just the beginning of the taste that Frank and eventually James would get for the outlaw life. Because they were doing this for the Confederacy, but this was very outlaw behavior.
Yeah.
This was... Confederacy was like, man, we don't like this, but like, you go do your own thing because you're making a difference for the Confederacy.
Yeah.
So that's just how they felt. So they would take the border wars. So this was a little bit later, the border wars that were going on in the area of Missouri and Kansas. This was like a huge thing going on during the Civil War, especially in these two areas, because they were really fighting. The Union and Confederacy were really fighting to see who could take control of these states.
Gotcha.
Because they were both, I believe they were both like neutrality states, neutral states.
Yeah.
So they wanted to take control to be like, no, they're a Confederate state now. So it was crazy. So the raiders would rob the Union mail, ambush and attack Union soldiers on patrol, and even attack boats along the Missouri River during these border wars.
My goodness.
Yeah. So they were using all the guerrilla warfare that the Confederacy would not be able to get away with. So they were pretty much like sneaking up on these guys, like showing up hella early in the morning and just started shooting down people, started just looting everything, just going crazy. They had no strategy like you would in like the actual between the Union and Confederacy. They had like more strategy.
Yeah.
Whereas like guerrilla warfare is just full on just let's go and raid the town. Let's just go crazy and just not care.
And there's no like leader, so they're all just kind of going crazy.
Well, yeah, like Quantrill is probably like, we're going to do this at this time.
Yeah.
This is our objective. But then
there's
it
no,
was like
boundary.
It was like a free for all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. It was crazy. So the raiders and Quantrill himself would gain a lot of hate from Union supporters and sympathizers. And how did he manage all of that from them? Well, he would attack them too.
Oh.
So any sympathizer and supporter, he would be like, you're getting beat up too. You're getting,
not safe.
You're getting raided. You're getting looted. Yeah, no one was safe if you were anywhere near the Union. So he had no care, and his goal of carnage for the Union, he was set on it, and he made well of that.
Wow.
He caused a lot of issues. So it would be in August of 1862 that the raiders would attack Independence, Missouri early in the morning. They would go through the town, capturing, murdering, and destroying the property of the Union. It was in the following year, in 1863, Frank and James would join the fight the raiders had gained such notoriety for. Along with the James brothers, he would include the younger brothers. They would create a gang with James brothers later on. I'll talk about them briefly. Mm-hmm. And Bloody Bill Anderson.
Oh.
So he was he would be an outlaw for the time.
Bloody Bill.
Mm-hmm. I believe he got killed in one of the raids. So, but
is that why they call him Bloody?
What a nickname.
Right.
Some of them have some interesting nicknames.
Make them sound more scary than they are.
100%. Some of them, though, were flat out just like psychotic. I was like, holy shit. So there would be 300 men a part of the raiders at this time. So they grew huge. Yeah, they were huge. And Quantrill decided they would attack Lawrence, Kansas. This would be a huge and bloody event in history. Early in the morning, Quantrill and his raiders would enter the town, and in hours, he and his men would burn, loot, and start murdering people of Lawrence.
Oh my God. About
180 men would be killed in this event, and it would go down as Lawrence Massacre.
Wow.
These guys were straight up savages. And not like, oh, you're so savage, like straight up savages.
Dang.
Like they're fucking crazy. So Frank was noted to be there, but there has not been found definitive proof that Jesse was there, other than him bragging that he was.
Oh, wow.
So that's pretty much.
Okay.
And he was young at this time. He was like 15.
Okay.
Yeah, like
wow.
Jesse was still young. So crazy shit would go down when Jesse would return home after this whole massacre. It was only a couple months later that Union soldiers would show up on the farm. Like, they found out where Jesse and Frank lived because they heard that they were a part of this raiders group. And they were like, fuck no, like, we're going to get stuff straight. We got to find out where the main hub is, like where their hideout is.
Yeah.
And so they showed up on the farm and started demanding answers about where the camp for Contrail was. They're like, where is he? And Jesse refused to give him up. He was like, I ain't telling you nothing. Y'all a bunch of trash.
Yeah.
And they did not like that answer. So they would horsewhip him.
Oh my God.
In response. And Archie was even questioned. So his stepdad. And he was hanged several times. So pretty much they would put the noose around his neck and pull it to where he would pretty much be hanged.
He knew about the whole thing, right?
Well, he knew about the group that Jesse and Frank, but yeah, he had no idea where this camp was.
Yeah.
Archie was just on the farm with his slaves and his kid, and they were farming.
Right.
And so they had no idea where this was, but I think they used Archie as motive to be like, hey, we're going to hang your stepdad.
Yeah.
If you don't tell us where he is. And so they would do the hanging motion several times to pretty much enough to start choking you. So it was a form of torture.
Yeah.
But he ended up surviving. So they didn't end up killing him. And they got no answers out of Jesse or Archie.
So they just left?
Yeah, I mean, there was nothing that they could do. So I'm sure Jesse was like, they keep moving. I don't know where they go. But I'm sure he knew.
Oh, yeah.
He definitely knew. So because of this interrogation, Jesse had even more hate for the Union. He hated them so much at this point. So just at the ripe age of 16, Jesse would join Bloody Bill on a raid in Centralia, Missouri. This town was small, but they were intent on robbing the people. I was like, seriously? A small little town?
Aw,
why?
poor little people.
But there was a train that stopped by the town, and he was like, this is a perfect place.
Oh, okay.
So they would go on to terrorize the people and burn a good chunk of town before the train come in.
Oh, wow.
So they got a lot done before the train came in. And when the train arrived, it would be filled with wounded Union soldiers.
Oh, my God.
They would go on to murder those soldiers and a few of the bystanders that got in their way. Because some people tried to break it up, try to stop. Bloody Bill, Jesse, and probably a few others, a part of the raiders. And
wow.
Yeah, they got away with it and then they ran off.
Dang. I wonder how many people they killed in that moment.
Dude, I don't even know if they have an actual solid estimate of how many people he actually murdered.
Right. It's probably hard to know.
It was a lot.
Jeez, that's crazy.
Yeah. So a battle would continue then south of Centralia when the Union infantry caught up with Jesse and the band of raiders. So they were like, fuck these guys. Let's try and end this. So they would fight. It was just pretty much guerrilla warfare of them just shooting at each other, trying to see who was going to win.
Yeah.
So it was another battle. So Jesse was noted for killing several men, plus the men earlier that day. So depending on how many he did. So dude's almost hitting double digits at this point. It's fucking crazy.
Oh my God.
And it does count when you're in war. So somehow they managed to survive. So for the next 2 years, Jesse and the raiders would travel around Kansas and Missouri causing trouble. It wasn't until 1865 that it was evident that the war was coming to an end. So they were doing all this raiding, all this pillaging, looting, and they were losing.
Oh my God.
So they were doing good the first 2 or 3 years. And then once it started hitting 1864, they're like, this ain't looking good.
Yeah.
So as Jesse was on his horse, so it was the spring of 1865, so it was getting the end of the war. Jesse was on his horse in Lexington, and he would have a white flag and waving it in surrender. And the Union saw him and knew who he was and was like, that's a Confederate guerrilla trash.
Oh, no.
And so he would actually be shot in the chest. He miraculously survived this.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And that is where I leave us for this week.
Ooh, what's going to happen after the war?
So we're going to get to the outlaw side of Jesse James next week.
I mean, it makes sense of why he ended up that way because he's growing up with nothing but violence around him. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't blame him.
Mm-hmm. And he had so much hate for the Union. And then when the Union wins.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
Man.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I'm invested.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Stay tuned for next week, y'all.
Yes, stay tuned.
Don't want to miss what happens next.
Mm-hmm. So where can you find us?
You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Historia the Podcast. And you can also email us at historiathepodcast@gmail.com.
Whoop, whoop.
All right. Stay tuned for when we release part 2 because it's coming next week.
Oh.
All right. We'll talk to you then.
Bye.
Bye.